Carley Fawn. I'm the Senior Manager of Behavioral Rehabilitation and Research. My title recently changed, enroll again. Is Jess Saplinski on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, do you want to say a couple things before you have to jump off?
Sure. I'm sorry I can't stay on the whole call today. I just wanted to say hello to you guys and introduce myself. I'm Jess Saplinski. I'm a Dogtown caregiver, and I've worked at Best Friends for just about 7 years, and I'm really excited to work with all of you in the mentorship program, and I think this is an awesome kickoff for all of us. I know the session's being recorded, so I will go back and watch it later and see what your questions were and things like that for Dr. Carley, but I'm really excited to work with all of you guys, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
All right.
Thanks, Dr. Carley.
Yeah, no problem, Jess. I've been with Best Friends for a little over 3 years. I've been working in animal welfare since about 2006. Worked with a variety of species from non-human primates and companion dogs and cats to some other kind of exotic species and sanctuary type environments. So I was asked to speak with everyone about how to talk about behavior. And this is one of my favorite presentations to give. I'm talking a lot about functional assessments, but in implementing functional assessments into our day-to-day routines, it sounds a little bit more complex than it is. A lot of us are already doing it. We're just not calling it this. But a big part of it that's critical to be successful is really learning and for it to become second nature for us to operationalize the behaviors that we're talking about. So I'm going to be, yes, this is a presentation about functional assessments, but again, the key component is how do we talk amongst each other about the behaviors that we're seeing in the animals in our care. You'll hear me talking more about dogs than cats in this presentation, but everything that I'm talking about and referring to is useful and applicable for all species in our care. Okay, so throughout this presentation, I will continuously discuss how we should all talk about the behaviors of the animals. You'll hear me saying that over and over. The behaviors of the animals that we see and experience so we can set them up for success and have consistent communication with our coworkers and volunteers. I'll explain where behavior comes from and how we can change animal behavior to enhance not only their quality of life while in the shelters, but of course, to increase their adoptability. You should see an ongoing theme that as I discuss these various topics, everything I'm talking about is already part of your daily routine, but to implement functional assessments, it's really integral for us to change our mindsets and how we interact with our animals and interpret their behavior. So before we dive in, I want everyone to think about an animal, just one animal currently in your shelter or foster program that presents challenging behaviors. I want you to think about the context in which these behaviors occur. What is the behavior that is challenging? And what is currently being done to change that behavior? So I'll give you all a moment because I want you to hold on to this one single animal and kind of use that as your examples as we're going through some various exercises throughout this presentation. Okay, so what are functional assessments? Functional assessments are a systematic process to identify specific behaviors and their environmental causes and to formulate effective behavior modification strategies. This was developed by Dr. Susan Friedman, who is a human behaviorist, but applied this kind of assessment to the field of animal behavior. So functional assessments are all about understanding the behaviors we observe, and again, the environment in which these behaviors occur. We're challenged to think about how the environment might be influencing behavior and what behavior modification strategies will be successful. The goal when faced with undesirable behaviors is to decrease the problem behavior, increase appropriate alternative behaviors, and teach new skills. Many of you are probably familiar with some of the formal assessments that have been used in shelters over the past probably 10, 15, 20 years now. Safer is a really common one. And so I want to differentiate between those kinds of formal assessments versus functional assessments that we're going to focus on today. So formal assessments can sometimes provide valuable information about an individual animal. However, these formal assessments are only a snapshot in time for the individual and in that context. So we really shouldn't be making a lot of assumptions based on what we see in these formal assessments. It's just a snapshot in this uncomfortable, very specific situation. Whereas functional assessments are ongoing, and we constantly are reevaluating an animal's behavior under multiple situations or contexts. So these kinds of assessments, the functional assessments, allow us to better understand how an animal behaves in a variety of situations, which will inform us of how to implement basic life-saving programs for them to be more successful. So functional assessments are much more effective instead of formal assessments because the functional assessments provide a clearer picture of who each individual animal is while informing us of problem behaviors we can help the animal to overcome and help the animal to learn new skills or coping behaviors as needed. So as I've already said a couple times, how we talk about behavior is extremely important and can be life-saving for the animals in our care. We want to talk about the observable behaviors or the overt behaviors because this will allow us to better understand what the animal needs and to develop effective training decisions. So bear with me while we go through a couple of definitions and then we'll get to some interactive exercises if we can interact or not, it's fine. Okay, so we do not want to make decisions about behavior change based on covert behaviors, which are an animal's internal behaviors that we cannot see or assess, such as thoughts, feelings, motivations, or intentions. Oftentimes, when we talk about an animal's covert behavior, we can be inaccurate and therefore restricting our language to the observable, measurable behaviors that are in front of us will be critical in working to change behavior and save lives. It's not to say that animals don't have thoughts, feelings, motivations, and intentions. We know that they do. But when we're talking about behavior change, again, it's really important to stick to describing the exact behaviors that we are seeing and experiencing rather than developing constructs, which are assumptions about covert behaviors. This can also lead us in the wrong direction. Okay, so learning the difference. I'm just going to go through a couple of these. And normally I would be asking, you know, do you think the behaviors are internal or external? But I will just walk us through this. And so here we're really used to discussing covert behaviors as fact. And so we need to practice translating our covert assumptions into overt descriptions. So here I have some examples where I'm asking, are we talking about internal or external behaviors? So Big Boy thinks he rules the roost. And I'm trying to use terminology here that we and even myself still use when talking about some animals, but showing how we can reconstruct these kind of assumptions into observable behaviors. So Big Boy thinks he rules the roost. That doesn't tell us a whole lot about what that really means versus Big Boy necks over the other dogs in his run. That tells us descriptively what Big Boy is doing in a specific interaction. Laz feels claustrophobic with 4 dogs in his run. Again, I could maybe pull something from here, like, okay, so maybe 4 dogs is too much in his run. But telling me what's actually happening to Laz in the situation, Laz pants and paces when 4 dogs are in his run, is much more informative and much more helpful for us to better understand what's going on and determine what needs to happen in the future for Laz. This is an easy one to use. I'm still guilty of this as well. So Beamer is afraid of strange men. It's a really common terminology that we use in our industry. This is common, right? We have fearful animals, cats, dogs, multiple species. But again, this doesn't tell me from a behavior change perspective how to interpret this and what to do in the future. Versus Beamer ducks his head, drops his tail, cowers in a corner, and pees whenever a strange man enters his run. This gives me much more information, and I can better interpret, but also have better follow-up questions with this more detailed information. So just think about some other examples. Think about how you've used this language and what you could have used instead. With that one animal I asked you to hold in your mind, think about why you chose that animal and how at the beginning you were thinking about, okay, what are the behaviors? Under what context do these behaviors occur? Were you thinking about it and describing it in some of these ways rather than being objective and operationalizing those behaviors, or was it a combination? So it's just a really good practice for us to take a step back whenever we're documenting, when we're talking about animals with our volunteers and staff, to catch ourselves. And it's okay for me to say, man, Beamer really is afraid, and me catch myself and say, okay, this is what I actually mean. So in this next exercise, it's asking, are we talking about who the animal is or what the animal does? We're very used to discussing who animals are, but we need to practice learning how to describe what they're doing. So it's similar, but a little bit different than the previous. Here we say Milo is smart. There's so many different interpretations of that word and the other words that I've already described. So my interpretation of being told a dog is smart could be very different from Michelle's interpretation of being told a dog is smart. What is more useful is to know is that Milo learns new behaviors quickly. So maybe we learn that we know that he learns new behaviors quickly and he enjoys that based on his body language. And so this is something we can really cater to potential adopters and foster homes about a really great positive trait for Milo and what he enjoys from these activities. Another common use term, hyperactivity. Ziggy is hyperactive. Again, my initial interpretation, whether I know the dog or not, can be very different from other people's interpretation of this word. Ziggy runs along the fence for hours at a time. That is so critical for us to know, to be able to help Ziggy overcome this or change his environment, develop some training enrichment plans for him. It's just much more informative for us to know exactly why do you think he's hyperactive? Because he does this. So we can ask some questions when other staff and volunteers come to us with this terminology and say, well, what does that mean to you? And tell me what Ziggy's actually physically doing. Lourdes is dominant. Another very misinterpreted terminology here. What Lourdes does is humps dogs when she meets them, and that could be viewed to some people as dominance, even though it's not. But this more descriptive and, again, operationalizing the behavior is so important for us. Okay, a couple more definitions. So now that we know how to talk about the behaviors we observe, there's also two basic types of behaviors that depend on environmental events in different ways. Remember, we want to recognize the behaviors readily and understand the environment in which they occur. So respondent behaviors are innate and built into the nervous system, meaning that they are triggered by eliciting stimulus automatically without prior experience. For example, a puff of air directed at an animal's eye automatically elicits a blink. This is a respondent behavior that occurs automatically. Whereas operant behaviors depend on the consequences that follow, meaning behaviors will be strengthened or weakened depending on what happens after the behavior is presented. In other words, the continuation of that behavior is dependent on the consequences the behavior produced in the past. And this is what we're going to break down specifically. This is the underlying foundation of functional assessment. So Dr. Friedman says that the main focus of functional assessment is operant behavior, as so many problem behaviors are the result of poorly arranged antecedent signals and inadvertent reinforcement. There will be more definition breakdown. This is so common in shelter behavior, but the good thing is that we have the ability to do better and to change our behavior in order to change an animal's behavior. Something I say all the time, and it's no secret that to those that have seen me present, but every interaction we have with an animal is a learning experience for them, and for us. So by changing our mindsets to implementing functional assessments with every interaction we have, we can see remarkable progress in our animals, and this practice will quickly become second nature for you. The way that I just explained how to talk about behavior will come so naturally to you with practice. For me, it's almost impossible to walk by any animal in a shelter, down the street, anything like that, and not immediately observe what the animal is doing. What are the behaviors they're presenting? Whereas I used to go to and think more about their covert behaviors and build those constructs that we just talked about. Now my mind is immediately saying, okay, the physical body language that this animal is presenting tells me this, and can build upon that. So where does behavior come from? It's just as important to understand where behavior comes from as it is to be accurate in the way we talk about behavior. We know that we don't always know all the past experiences. We rarely know the past history of the animals in our care that we're working with. But based on their body language and their exposure to different situations, and again, body language is a big part of this, we can make some assumptions, but behavior does come from past experiences and consequences from their behaviors in the past. Again, we don't always know that or what happened in the past, but reading their body language is super important to maybe inform us of that. The environment, as you all know, plays a huge role in animal behavior. There have been years and years of research with multiple species indicating that the environment in which the animal lives directly affects their behavior and their well-being. So as a result of that environment, behavior might come from fear, frustration, boredom, or excitement. I'm sure we've all seen this over and over. We also need to be aware that behavior can be the result of physiological ailments, and that's why whenever you're trying to change behavior, you should always consult the humane hierarchy first, that I'm briefly going to go over. I don't have time to go over all of this, but I do want to put it on your radar. And there's different variations. If you Google the humane hierarchy, there's different variations in the way that this is presented. So you can do some Googles and see the other diagrams of this, but the messaging ultimately is the same. So at the top of the humane hierarchy is to check for medical first. This is especially important if a new behavior appears that hadn't been seen before. Then there may be an underlying medical reason, and you want to get that checked out. If they're cleared for medical, then the next step would be to manipulate the environment before implementing a training plan. This is called antecedent arrangement, and we're going to talk a lot about antecedent arrangements in a minute. It's one of the key components of functional assessments. So antecedents are those stimuli, events, or conditions that occur immediately before the behavior. This is at the desirable end of the hierarchy because it's less intrusive. You're not actually trying to change the behavior via reinforcement, punishment, or extinction, but rather manipulate the environment to improve the likelihood of the behavior you want. I know that we can be limited in manipulating the environment in shelters, but get your teams together, think creatively, and you might be surprised at what you can accomplish there. If that's not successful, then you will want to move on to some training plans based on classical or operant conditioning techniques. As I said, I don't have time to go through all this, but this is the order in which I would pursue a training plan. I would first develop a modification plan based on positive reinforcement, meaning you're adding something to the situation to increase the desirable behavior, such as using a treat when a dog sits. So giving the dog sits, give them a treat, positive reinforcement. Or counter-conditioning the dog's emotional response to a trigger. This means if an animal has an undesirable response to a trigger, such as barking at cars, then you can use something that the animal really enjoys, which again could be a tasty treat, to change their emotional response. The response is likely out of fear, and with the use of treats or excitement sometimes, the use of treats in these situations and used appropriately, that fear when seeing the trigger can shift to an association of something good when consistently paired with treats. So again, you can go to our website for specific definitions for each term on this slide and why we base our training on the higher end of the humane hierarchy. I like to always talk a little bit about the 5 freedoms. I think this is really important, and it is also kind of goes hand in hand with the humane hierarchy, as well as the the ABCs for functional assessments that we'll get into in a minute. So it's super important to remember what the 5 freedoms are, and I'll have them on the next slide. So yeah, I think it's really important for any shelter to have these 5 freedoms posted around the facility. They were developed in the 60s to prevent the suffering of farm animals. It was said that the welfare of an animal includes his or her physical and mental state, and we consider that good animal welfare implies both fitness and a sense of well-being. Any animal kept by humans must at least be protected from unnecessary suffering. So these are the 5 freedoms. Freedom from hunger and thirst by ready access to fresh water and diet to maintain health and vigor. Freedom from discomfort by providing an appropriate environment, including shelter and a comfortable resting area. Freedom from pain, injury, or disease by prevention or rapid diagnosis and treatment. Freedom to express normal behavior by providing sufficient space, proper facilities, and company of the animal's own kind. Freedom from fear and distress by ensuring conditions and treatment which avoid mental suffering. So again, a common theme among these 5 freedoms is how critical the environment plays in the animal's well-being. Okay, so now we're going to jump into functional assessments. And we call it the ABCs, antecedent, behavior, consequence, to break down the situation that we're exploring. So a couple more definitions and then another exercise to bring these definitions into play. So with operant behavior, the smallest unit of analysis is the 3-term contingency, the ABCs, the antecedent, behavior, consequence. Again, antecedent is the environmental context immediately before the behavior that causes it to occur. We're also going to keep in mind distant antecedents, which are the background context or the events that led up to the string of events. Behavior is what the animal does. Remember, we want to recognize and explain behavior in observable operational terms. Consequence is whatever occurs in the environment immediately after that behavior that either causes the behavior to continue or increase or decrease or cease. So when A, the antecedent happens, B, the behavior will likely decrease or increase in order to get or avoid C, the consequence. So here's an example. The distant antecedent for this setup is a 1-year-old dog was surrendered to the shelter after spending 8 months living on a chain outside. The dog was malnourished and under-socialized. So that the limited history that we do know can be defined as the distant antecedents to give us a little bit more information that could lead up to the behaviors that we're seeing. What happens in this situation is that I offer my hand, the dog growls, and I remove my hand. So me offering my hand is the situation or stimulus that is occurring just before the behavior, which is the dog growling. And when the dog growls, I remove my hand. So that's the smart thing to do, right? And the prediction here, though, is that the growling will continue or increase in this situation. And so we need to figure out how to, there's a lot of different things, but in the ABC arrangement, how can we provide some other options and work through this dog's, gaining some more of this dog's trust? So this is from one of Friedman's papers in 2009. It's the same example. So we have the distant antecedent, we have the immediate antecedent of offering the hand, and here Friedman provides 3 options: the desired behavior, the current problem behavior, and a replacement behavior. So currently the dog growls, the hand's removed. The growling will likely increase. If the desired behavior here is we just want this dog to initially touch the hand with his nose. And then the consequence of doing that is they get a treat. So we're giving them something positive in this association of interaction with humans to try and change that emotional response again. Or we could say, let's take a step back, literally, and yeah. So we could say, let's offer a replacement behavior. So we offer the hand, dog steps back, hand is removed. we don't ever want to take the growl out of the dog, and that's not necessarily happening in this situation. By giving the dog the option or the freedom and agency to move back from an uncomfortable situation, that can be a starting point to build up to the desired behavior of touching the nose to the hand and then getting a treat. Okay, so Friedman's questions to always ask yourself when wanting to change behavior are listed on this slide. What is the behavior? What exactly is the animal doing? When does the animal do this? Or what events predict it? What does your animal get or get away from by omitting this behavior? And what's the consequence in that situation? When does your animal not do this? Or when are they successful? What do you want them to do instead? So the last couple questions are questions that I found myself and working with other colleagues. It's like, okay, we're so focused on the problem behavior in front of us, but we're failing to recognize specifically, again, when does this happen? And what do we want them to do instead? And when are they not doing this problem behavior? So really, again, paying attention to the environment and the context in which these behaviors occur, or when they are not occurring, it's just as important. Okay, so here's a long example that we're going to break down. Every day, Elizabeth goes to Potter's area at 10 a.m. and opens the door to the kennel area. The dogs start barking. Elizabeth checks the whiteboard for notes, walks to Potter's kennel, and enters the run. As soon as Elizabeth approaches the run, Potter is jumping. When she enters the run, Potter jumps up on her. Elizabeth always pushes Potter off her, says no, and proceeds to leash Potter for a walk. So I'm going to give you a minute to read through that again and think about what are the distant antecedents, what is the antecedent, what's the behavior, and what's the consequence of that behavior. We're also, on the next slide, we'll have the answers to this, but we also want to think about, with the ABC, the antecedent, behavior, and consequence arrangement in the situation, what do we predict about future behaviors? What are some ways we can change the antecedents or the consequence to change the behavior? And what can we teach the animal to do instead? Okay. So the background, which can also be the distant antecedents, is that Elizabeth goes to Potter's area at the same time every day, 10 a.m. She does the same thing every day when she enters the kennel, gets the other dogs start barking. Again, those behaviors can come from frustration, excitement. They know she's here. They know they're going to get out for walks. She does her normal check of the whiteboard before she moves forward, and she walks to Potter's kennel. We're focusing on the jumping behavior specifically here in this situation. There's other behaviors that we could work towards, but for Potter specifically, the jumping behavior is elicited when Elizabeth enters the run. The consequence of this is that Elizabeth says no and pushes Potter off of her, and then continues to take Potter for a walk. I know we're all guilty of this. We get so tight on time, and we're like, okay, we really got to get these dogs out. Whatever they're doing, let's just get them out and get them on their walks. And with practice, we can work on not inadvertently reinforcing the undesirable behavior. So just because Elizabeth says no and pushes Potter off of her, she's actually encouraging that jumping behavior. Oftentimes, dogs that are jumping in this potentially excitable way is because they're trying to get attention from whoever the person is in their run or whatever context that might be in. And so simply by giving that attention in a way that we think might be deferring them, the dog at this time does not understand that by saying no, he shouldn't jump, and then she's giving him physical attention by pushing him off of her, which he probably actually enjoys, and then he gets to go for a walk. So there's a lot of accidental reinforcement of this undesirable behavior. So with this current setup, I predict that when Elizabeth enters Potter's run, Potter will continue to jump on her in order to get attention and get to go for a walk. So talking about changing behaviors, we can talk about changing the antecedent, not doing all, some dogs really thrive off structure and routine, but that predictability, especially in a shelter environment, can be detrimental. So let's change up our routine a little bit if needed. Look at what other specifics you can do to change the environment. And like I keep saying, what are some alternate or incompatible behaviors that we can teach instead? So I have two videos here. We have Wendy on the left, and the team has taught her to go to place because she obsessively humps her caregivers when she's super excited. So this is her. So there, as soon as the caregiver enters her run, she asks her to go to place because it's really exciting when we enter their runs, right? So it's giving her something else to do. She can't go to place and hump the caregiver at the same time. On the right, we have a beautiful dog named Guy. He becomes very jumpy mouthy when he's overstimulated. And so again, we taught him to go to place. So let's play that. So again, teaching him to go to place allows him to do something else that is incompatible with jumping and being mouthy, and he gets rewarded for this behavior, of course. We want him to continue to do this. I know some of you might be thinking you don't have time to teach this. And it can feel overwhelming initially to implement some of these training plans. But if you accept that every interaction with your animal is a learning experience, and then you have to take advantage of these opportunities. We have these training plans step by step on our website. You can look at them, and again, you might feel overwhelmed, but just take it one step at a time. Working on one step each day is better than not. So I really encourage you to check out some of our training plans for these alternative behaviors that are incompatible for the behaviors that are not desirable. Oh, sorry, it always does that. Okay, so I have some videos of me now with a dog named Hendrix doing some functional assessments. And this will really demonstrate to you that by doing functional assessments, I'm not recommending or asking that anyone do more than what they're already doing. Simply entering their run, getting them harnessed or leashed for their walk, taking them on their walks, all these things, those are really important interactions. And to operationalize the behaviors that you're seeing is just as important to document so that your fellow staff and volunteers can know what's happening. They can learn from you as to how you're describing behavior, and they can document as well. So Hendrix is a dog that came to us that was rescued during Hurricane Harvey. His name was Sherman during Hurricane Harvey. And so he had been adopted, and I knew him very well during Hurricane Harvey. He came to the sanctuary. I worked with him at the sanctuary while he was with us. He was adopted and returned, really no fault of his own. But this is me going to work with him in our admissions building after being returned. So it's my first time going in to harness and leash him. I hadn't worked with him in months, hadn't even seen him in months, really. And what I'm doing is just seeing how he responds to this. And I'm not necessarily training him yet. So keep in mind that what I'm doing is very basic and what most of you, again, do with your dogs every single day. As we go through some of these build out videos of me and Hendrix, keep those ABCs in mind. What's the antecedent? If there are distant antecedents, what are they? What are the behaviors that we're seeing, whether I'm in training mode or not in training mode? And what are the consequences of those behaviors? All right, so all right, so here again, I'm just going in, who are you today? Who are you now? Here we can see that there's some challenges with the harness. It's an immediate toy and he wants to play tug. I did pull out some treats just to see if he would go for the treats and drop the harness. I didn't have much success with that. So the antecedent here is me entering the run with the harness. The behavior here, one of them, is that he pulls and grabs the harness. He's also jumping on me, but for this, he's pulling and grabbing the harness. And the consequence is that I try to drop the harness to not encourage that behavior. However, what I predict is that without a management plan, including a higher reinforcer of food than what I had, and teaching him alternative behaviors, that Hendrix will continue jumping around, being loose and wiggly, but also grabbing and pulling on the harness. You know, these jumpy, mouthy dogs that are happy dogs or excited dogs and loose and wiggly. They can still be very challenging, and just this behavior alone can deter volunteers and some staff from wanting to go in and walk Hendrix because it's such a process just to even get the harness on him. So you'll see in this next video, it's a continuation of the previous video where I'm still trying to get the harness on him. We had to take a break. So I'll play it and then I'll just pay attention to my whoopsies and pay attention to his body language again, thinking about what's the antecedent that we already know, me entering with the harness or entering the run with the harness, what's the behavior and what's the consequence. Okay, so lots of things happen there. I used to be really embarrassed by this video, but I've really come to love it because I messed up. And that's why I used to be embarrassed. But it's a really great learning moment at the same time. So what happened is I finally got the harness over his head, just over his head, and it was on inside out. And so that's where I was like, oh my gosh, I have to, after I made it this far with this dog, I have to start all over. And the point is, that's okay. We're all going to make mistakes. I remove it and I try again. I try to use some treats that are clearly not as high value for him. I do begin asking him for sits, knowing that he already knows that behavior. And finally, I have the harness on him. When the harness is on him, there was even some slight mouthing and orienting towards me, but still with that loose, wiggly body. And then you can see I finally get the leash on him. He pulls the leash. We exit the run, and I don't have good control of him on leash. I have the leash too far out to walk past so many dogs and so many runs right here. And I also didn't set him up for success because he historically has had some dog reactivity. We know that he still, from the adopter notes, exhibits some of that, but he made great strides. However, what you see, if you can see my mouse, rolled up next to every single one of these runs are actually visual barriers that we can temporarily put up over these runs to de-escalate these situations. He jumped on the first run, he's barking, they're barking. So there's a lot of things that we could have done to better set him up for success. Okay, so here is me out on a walk with him. He needs to get out of his run. Again, just a normal day-to-day activity. I want to see what his leash skills are like. I also just know historically, again, that he is dog reactive. I also know that he is already clicker trained. So I have my treat bag, I have my clicker. I think in this video, we'll see. We'll watch and see what I'm doing. I don't think I'm quite training yet, but I might be figuring out who he is and what he's going to respond to. Again, pay attention to his body language, pay attention to his behaviors, and what are the consequences of his behaviors. All right, so I want to note here that at this point in time, there were 0 dogs in visual access to him. He could not actually see any dogs. We can hear the dogs barking. We know there are dogs around, but this is his behavior when he's not even seeing dogs. So yeah, so I was trying to not do any training, but see how he responds to the environment, and also how he'll just respond and engage with me. Clearly, he's very interested in the environment. So I get down to his level to see if he will engage with me, and he doesn't really. He keeps his weight forward and focuses on everything else around the environment except for me as the handler. So even in me describing that, I said he's very interested in the environment. That's a vague statement, but I later break that down by saying he keeps his weight forward and focus on me. He's at the end of the leash the majority of the time. So what are the ABCs here? What's the behavior? Hendrix is pulling towards where dogs are and will not focus on the handler. What happened before this is that there were dogs barking at the distance, and when we came out, so that's an immediate trigger for him in this situation. But there's also a distant antecedent in that he had just walked past 6+ dogs to exit the building, was already reacting. Those was already barking and lunging. Some of those dogs were barking and lunging back at him through their barriers. And so, again, keeping that in mind, what kind of environmental control can we or arrangement can we set up so that he doesn't already come out of the building on high alert? What happens when Hendrix presents the behavior? In this situation, I'm allowing him to pull where he wants to go. I do try to get his attention without any success. So if his walks continue this way, we will definitely expect that he will continue to pull on the leash. Sorry. Okay, so now I'm going to try and change the behavior a little bit. Again, I'm going to see what Hendrix already knows and what I can teach him to change his leash pulling behavior. So let's play this and we can dissect it. So I am using the clicker, starting with his name to see if he'll respond to his name. I'm still letting him explore a little bit. I would rather him be exploring and smelling the ground than just pulling me towards other dogs. This was a previous construction area, so I did not want him to go into that space. Okay, so that was a little bit of a longer video, but I'm going to break it down a little. So as I said, I'm using a clicker. When I say his name, if he orients towards me, if he looks towards me, then I'm going to click and give him a treat. I'm letting him explore the environment a little bit, like I said, and then I do some more clicker work with name recall, and then I'm asking him for sits. Sometimes I have to lure his attention by putting a treat in front of his nose. Once I have his attention, I'm going to click and treat when he looks at me. I'm going to do that when he sits and do so with a high rate of reinforcement. So if you remember, I had him sit in front of me for a little bit. I also did some eye contact work, so kind of switching it up for him, because what he was initially doing was he would sit or he would take the treat and then immediately turn back, take the treat and immediately turn back. So I wanted him to engage with me a little bit longer and kind of look to me for what should I be doing. Okay, so then I walk again and change directions. I go and let him check out an empty yard. I clicked and treated when I say his name and he looks at me again. And then I wanted to see what happens when there are actually dogs in closer proximity. And you notice he went way over threshold and I couldn't get his attention. So I'm backing up, backing up, backing up. But as soon as he looks at me, whether I asked for it or not, I clicked and he responded and came to me and I was able to give him that treat. And so, in those higher intensity situations, it's definitely where you would want to increase your rate of reinforcement. Okay, so a couple more videos of Hendrix. And again, I'm really trying to be descriptive in the behaviors that I observe, but also demonstrate that what we're doing here, again, is something we can do within our day-to-day routines. We can have volunteers work on this, especially for the next piece that I'm about to do. We know that the harness is super exciting for him. Me entering without the harness, yeah, he can be a little jumpy sometimes, but more interactive. Me entering with the harness, it has a different kind of predictability. It means that he's going to get to go out on a walk. He's going to get to go look at all those really fun dogs that are really exciting for him. And so instead, what I'm going to do now is just work on his harness work. So being calm for harnessing, I'm going to play around with some different treats, different high value treats, and see what works best for him. So I will play this video here. I'm using deli meat, I think. Did not end up going as well as I wanted, but it went a little better. I have the harness bunched up in my hand rather than dangling it. He eats it way too fast. But he's already a little calmer because it's as if he knows, okay, if I sit, I'm going to get that deli meat. It's so tasty. Now, when the harness goes over his head, we have a different challenge, right? And while he's loose and wiggly, it's a little questionable. Yeah, the harness is a little bit of a toy for him, but he also might be not enjoying the basic handling to get that belly strap on him. So again, I'm not going to take him for a walk yet, or at all at this moment. I'm just doing some basic clicker training work with him while he has his harness on. Then I want to see how he's going to respond to me. Excuse me. Just fumbling with things in his run, cleaning up his bedding. I was happy to see he did not grab the blanket as a toy like he did with the harness. I recognized that his food puzzle was still there. So as I'm picking it up, I'm tossing him treats so that he learns that every time we take something that might be high value away from him, he gets something else in return. I remove the harness. I toss a treat so I can leave, and that's it. So this is really good for us to know that, okay, the deli meat is a higher value food over what I was probably using was like the Zook's training treats before, when we're in that state of excitement in his run. The Zook's training treats did work okay out on the walk, but in more high intense moments, we might want to up that reinforcer to something more valuable. So because I didn't quite accomplish what I wanted to accomplish with the calm for harnessing behavior with the deli meat, I'm now entering with Kong filler. And I really wish I was wearing a body camera because it seems like he hadn't had this, or maybe wasn't expecting it, hadn't had it in a long time. His facial expression was, and his eyes were huge the first time he gobbled some of this up. So I'm entering again, trying to ask him for a sit to proof that behavior a little bit, to ask him for a sit outside his run. He's not quite responding to it, but he is calm and 4 on the floor, so I could go ahead and enter. He sits, I go. So you can see him kind of back away, and he's like, oh, what is this? This is great. So again, I'm not taking him out. I'm just going to hang out with him for a little bit. Again, constantly paying attention to the body language. Keep paying attention. There's a little subtle surprise that was informative around right here. I'm going to try and remove the harness. And he's completely avoiding me. Even though he's loose and wiggly, he's completely avoiding me with a little bit of whale eye. And so it could have been the squeeze can itself that he was avoiding, or he could have been avoiding my touch. So just in those interactions, paying attention to his subtle body language, I noted in his life care plan that we use here and in his online file that he did demonstrate some slight avoidance that could easily be overlooked because of his conflicting body language. He was loose and wiggly. I wasn't nervous in any way, but when I touched him, he avoided. He moved away from me anytime I touched him. And so that's something to take note of. Even though it's subtle, as we know, those things can escalate over time. And so documenting things early on, using the observable language that I've been discussing is really, really critical because, again, it's just that cross communication with your whole team. Okay. So understanding reinforcers, this is really important, and this is critical, like I was just talking about with Hendrix. The Zoox training treats inside his kennel were not reinforcing enough. His harness and pulling on the harness was much more reinforcing for him, so I had to find something higher value. So I do want to talk quickly about this and also a quick recap of relationship-based training. We want to always remember that the learner, in this case the animal, decides what is reinforcing and what is punishing. We want to think about what the animal enjoys the most. So primary reinforcers are innate and needed for survival, such as food, water, and even play. Secondary reinforcers are learned and are not necessary for survival, and not every dog or animal will find them reinforcing. So these are examples of petting, attention, verbal praise, toys, and the clicker. Intrinsic reinforcers are behaviors that are reinforcing in and of themselves, and these can be really challenging to troubleshoot because these are behaviors like barking, chewing, licking, and even jumping that can just be reinforcing in and of themselves for dogs. It's just fun for them. So we also have competing reinforcers. And those are things that are more reinforcing than the reinforcer being used in training, like the harness versus Zoox training treats for Hendrix. But another example is that I've been talking a lot about using treats, but not all dogs are treat motivated. And so you want to play around with different kinds of toys to see what might be reinforcing for them, or is petting more reinforcing for them. Every dog is an individual, every animal is an individual, and it's up to us to, again, pay attention to and document by operationalizing these behaviors on what are they enjoying and how do you know that? Break down okay, Hendrix enjoys this. Why do I know that? Let's break that down and write that down. So everything I've been talking about, what I've shown in working with Hendrix, should all stem and does all stem from relationship-based training. This uses the cooperative relationship between the trainer and the animal to achieve mutually beneficial results while at the same time enhancing and strengthening their relationship. What this means is that when changing behavior and interacting with our animals, we should always make this a positive experience for them and one that encourages their trust of humans and also make it fun for both you and them. As I've said, every interaction is a learning experience. So every time you interact with your dog or cats, you're training them, whether or not you intend to. This is so important to remember because this is where our behavior can directly influence the animal's future behavior. So let's try not to inadvertently reinforce undesirable behaviors. It's okay if that happens. We all make those mistakes. What's critical is that we're aware of that and we recognize that and we think about that for the next animal we're interacting with. Relationship-based training is a lifestyle. It's a constant dialogue with your animal rather than a one-way issuing of cues. It's all about changing behavior in a positive way through these force-free methods to build lasting relationships with your animals so they can generalize that relationship with other people. And wrapping up with my favorite quote from Ken Ramirez, which is, again, just repetitive of some things that I've already been saying. Training is not a luxury, but a key component to good animal care. Everyone who has a pet should understand that basic fact. Training is a way to enhance the quality of life for our pets. It is far more than just teaching a dog to do a cute trick. Training is about teaching a dog or any animal how to live in our world safely. And that's the key thing. It's up to us to teach our animals how to live in our world safely. And how we communicate about them internally and externally is critical, absolutely critical to their life saving. So, bring it all together. What we talked about today with behavior is just so critical. I can't say it over and over. How we talk about behavior is truly a life-saving component. So even using common terms like leash reactive, barrier reactive, those terms should be broken down. And I keep catching myself specifically in those areas because one dog's barrier reactivity is not necessarily the same as another dog's. And that's a really misunderstood behavior. So what happens after? What are the great traits about that dog that we can talk about in observable, measurable ways? So when we're working to change behavior, we need to understand what events predict that behavior and what consequences follow the behavior that will either cause the behavior to continue or decrease. Remember to think about what an animal can be taught to do instead. And again, learning is constant. Every interaction we have with our animals is a learning opportunity for them and us. If you don't walk away with anything else from this presentation, walk away with that, please. Every single interaction is a learning opportunity. And again, it's for both of us. So with that, keep that in mind, operationalize those behaviors. This isn't just about changing behavior, it's about changing and saving lives. And to do that, we have to keep these key components in mind. So here's a cute picture of Hendrix, who has since been adopted again. This is still him at the sanctuary, but he's doing really well in his adopted home now. So that's what I've got for today.
Thanks so much, Dr. Carley. Did anybody have any questions?
I just got so scared. I was like, did that work?
It worked, Dr. Carley, and I wanted to say, and I should have said in the beginning, like, we're so very fortunate and lucky to have you presenting to us. Sorry, I just jumped off from another meeting right onto this one, and I didn't say that in the beginning, so I just wanted to thank you. And I know that we have some questions.
Okay.
So I'm gonna open it up to the team.
Yeah, just remember that everyone was muted but Dr. Carley, so just be sure to unmute yourself. Don't talk to your screen or anything. She actually has to hear you.
Juanita, I know you're in the other room. If you have questions, also you guys can feel free, if you're on a computer without a microphone, just chat it in the chat box.
So this is all right. Sorry about that. So this is Juanita. So we do have a couple of problem children here at the shelter. Our biggest one that we're actually working on right now is stranger danger. Do you have any? I know it's hard to generalize, but do you have any recommendations for working through stranger danger? And the other one we have is starting as well.
Yeah, definitely. Stranger danger, very, very common. And yeah, I can give some general takeaways, and then I could share, as you guys probably know and have experienced, it's not black and white, right? Because every dog is an individual. So stranger danger, there's the look at that work that you can definitely use with them on leash. So setting up a stranger at a distance, and you don't have to use clickers. You can use verbal markers such as yes, or even their name when they're looking at a trigger. So you would notice sometimes when Hendrix was, I still use the clicker, but you don't have to, like, that can be the verbal marker of you saying that, okay, it's okay that you're looking at that, and you say Hendrix, and he looks back and you give him a treat. So you're, again, changing that emotional response to those strangers. So that's what I would start out with. And every dog's going to be different as far as what distance do they become, at what distance between the dog and the stranger does the dog become uncomfortable. And for some dogs, they'll become reactive and barking and vocalizing and pulling towards them or lunging in some cases. And so you want to capture that, what we call threshold, that distance, before they're actually reacting to the stimulus. And so you might notice some tighter, a tighter body, tighter mouth, ears forward. That's when you want to do it. And so you could say his name. You can do clicker work with them. And we have a step-by-step training plan for that. It's called Look at That, abbreviated LAT, lat work. That's really great for stranger danger, for humans, but also leash reactivity towards other dogs and other animals. So that's one thing. And then as you're working towards progressing the dog to meeting strangers, again, we want to change that emotional response, but also set an expectation. So here, what I like to do initially is develop a process in which the dogs know what to expect when meeting a new person. And you want to take it very slowly based on, wherever the dog is and in their intensity of their stranger danger and what that could result in. So if the dog has a bite history, I would recommend basket muzzle training as an extra precaution, where you can still give them treats through the muzzle. But what you can do is, the stranger is baited with really high value food, and we tend to use like long, like spatulas and spoons for added safety, both for the handler of the dog and the stranger. So you're both baited with that high value food. We use little containers of wet food sometimes in these situations, or peanut butter or string cheese or Kong filler, so you can put it on the spoon like that. And so you can have the person approach but not come all the way up to the dog. Again, reading their body language to what's the appropriate distance that this dog can handle this and still take treats and listen to you in that way. And so have the person approach you while you're holding the dog on leash, and you're giving you're constantly like letting them lick or giving them treats, or every time they look, give them a treat. So again, the person isn't all the way coming up to you, but the dog is getting used to people approaching, I get tasty things. People approaches, I get good things. People approach, I get great things. And over time, with that consistency and that practice, they will learn. And we've had really, really great success with this, with some specific case studies here at the sanctuary of dogs that have really, really practiced stranger danger behaviors. So those are two of the things that I would recommend. And then over time, as you're reading the body language and the dog's maybe emotions are starting to change these situations, you can have the person approach closer and closer, up to the point where you tell the stranger, when you're ready for that person to approach all the way, you're not going to initially go to petting, still doing the treats, but okay, when you approach, I want you to ask him for a sit and give him a treat. So that there's still another expectation here. So does that help? Those are a couple thoughts that came to mind there.
Yeah, no, that definitely really helps.
Great.
It reminds me of Jean Donaldson and her, what is it, the BAT training?
Yeah,
Kind of.
yeah. There's some similarities there, and yeah, I mean, like I said, I can send Michelle some of our training plans for some of our dogs like that. It's not going to be black and white, so you'll have to adjust as needed. But I think it can give you and your team ideas on where to start and how to build upon that.
Perfect. Our other issue that we have is the resource guarding. If you have any suggestions for that in terms of, basically we work around it right now for staff
Yeah.
safety, but a number of our stranger danger dogs also have resource guarding.
Of course. Yeah. 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 Resource guarding, it's a tricky one. Yeah. There's a lot of different suggested trainings and management plans out there. Like I'm doing a big research project looking at specific behaviors and behavior modification techniques that work well at varying degrees. And resource guarding is it is a tricky one, and there is such an array in my experience of intensity, meaning is the dog going to just posture and I don't mean just because it's a serious behavior, but is the dog going to posture over their food puzzle or food bowl? Are they going to pair that with a low growl, or are they going to outright come towards you rather than just giving you the clear warnings? So there's a lot of management techniques. A popular one that we use here for our more intense resource guarders when we're managing, it depends on your kennel setup that I unfortunately am not familiar with, but we'll use baking sheets if they can slide under the kennel and have it tied to the outside of the gate so we can slide it under and safely remove it. But while you're safely removing it, of course, you're tossing like higher value food in there. As I mentioned, when I took Hendrix's food puzzle away, every time we take something away, we're giving them something even better, or that we hope is better or higher value for them. So that's a management plan. In general, you can work on doing some trades with them always and teaching them leave it. And there's some really cool videos I can try and share with you all for a dog that it's a more intensive training plan, because he was a dog that would quickly approach and likely bite with little bite inhibition. But there's some videos I can send you that our training team here has compiled and working with one specific dog. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we could talk about resource guarding all day because there's so much to it, and it's, in my opinion, even more individualized. So I can give some basic ideas, like some of the ones that I just suggested, but always doing trades. What the videos that I'm referencing are, we have our dog tethered inside his kennel when we go to feed him. While he's tethered and being fed, we have really high value treats, and initially we're just tossing from the outside, and then we slowly progress to inside with some movement. And so tossing and him getting used to people being around and it not being a scary thing or a negative interaction. Obviously, to be able to tether him, that person, someone would need to have a relationship with that dog to be able to do that before the food is present.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Jen, probably regarding the same dog. His name is Julian. So being that he has kind of a lot of those behaviors together, he seems to respond better to the men at work, but being in the animal field, there's only about 3 or 4 of them at our shelter, so I have successfully not even been able to touch the dog. I tried to do sitting in front of his kennel, treating through the bars, but like Juanita said, being that he's a resource guarder, his threshold is extremely low, so if you stay still for less than 3 seconds, he's biting the bars towards you.
Okay.
So the baking sheet I think would definitely help, but is it beneficial at all to throw? It's not necessarily beneficial to throw over the tree. I mean, throw like over the kennel run, right? Because the top of the kennels are open, but it's hard because he even thinks milk bones are a high resource.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so initially working with like barrier reactive dogs and also like resource guarding in this way, it can feel like that we are reinforcing the behavior by tossing treats into the kennel when they are exhibiting such behaviors. But
Yeah.
again, what it really comes down to is them learning that you mean great things. And so doing that over and over. Now, it's tricky because is he going to, if you toss a treat, is he a dog that will then guard that treat from you?
Yeah,
Okay.
he will guard it from me, and I tried for a couple days last week. I didn't even attempt to get him out. I was just giving him like drive-bys. And tried to even, because I saw how reactive he was, the first thing I thought was, barrier could be making it worse. But,
Right.
The moment I opened that kennel, I mean, he lunged up at me. So it definitely, like, I can't, there's no in between at this point of me, like, going through the bars and then opening the kennel.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, like you mentioned, you have two things going on, right? That he actually takes to men better than women. And so what I would recommend, and I know this can be challenging, and that's obviously like an opposite effect than typical, but we have that, is doing parallel walks with the men or handlers that he has a really solid relationship with females at a safe distance. And so I would implement the lat work if it's safe for them to be able to do that, to give him a treat, small, like a small bite that he would be able to ingest. But even just walking, like if you can't use the treats in that situation, then having a known handler walk him with a stranger, a female specifically, to get him used to being around more females in relaxed situations, so it's not always the kennel environment.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, not regarding him, but we've never really utilized at our shelters harnesses and things like that. All of our walks are on slip leads, which I think in certain situations can be good, but I think sometimes when these animals are getting adopted or when I send them into foster, the first thing they're on is an easy walk, like the front clip harness.
Yep.
And so sometimes it's a little challenging because that's the first time they've ever been like, truly handled like that.
Yeah.
Is there certain dogs that you recommend? Because I know in the morning we take all of our animals outside to eat, and everybody's on slip. We're always on a time crunch, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there certain times that you just think that no matter what, a certain dog should be on an easy walk harness if they are always showing the pulling reactive behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, I know it is tricky. I come from, before I was with Best Friends, I was in South Louisiana, and we did use the slip leads a lot, but what I really focused on in those situations, and when I consult with other shelters, is prioritizing the population. So exactly kind of what you just recommended is that which dogs would benefit from this the most, both to overcome their reactivity, but also if they're heavy reactors and heavy pullers, we don't want to do damage to their neck. So I'd work with your medical team and your managers to figure out, which dogs can we start this with. I like to call these kinds of things pilot projects, and just start with like a small population, and see, what works and doesn't work, and implementing it that way. But yeah, I mean, for my personal experience, I've just had really great success with the front clip harnesses, paired with the lat work for on-leash reactivity to any stimulus. And but I know that that's not a realistic option for every shelter, everywhere, every day. So I would start with looking at who needs this the most, who would benefit from this the most, and how also, like, specifically who needs this the most and would increase their adoptability to get them out of the shelter.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely, being that we're closed, it's nice now because we're not having the same population. So we don't see the reactivity, but unfortunately on our main floor where the adoptable dogs are, the kennels are facing each other.
Right,
so
exactly.
through to like the visiting areas, adopters do see that, and sometimes you see their face when you have them on a sleep and the dogs are pulling, and it's like, oh goodness, let's hope they're still interested when they get in the room.
Right, right. I definitely understand that. I mean, I don't know how much you can, look at exploring temporary visual barriers when you're getting specific dogs out throughout the day. I know that's super, super tricky in day-to-day operations, but something to play around with. And maybe there's specific dogs. Again, you don't want the like a blanket or something like that up all day. But if you know when you get dog A out, dog B is always going to have a high intensity of reactivity, which causes dog A to mimic that and exhibit those same behaviors, then that's where you can play around with the environment a little bit more as well. And I wanted to note too, you mentioned that, when dogs go into foster homes, oftentimes they're being introduced to front clip harnesses. And, so you can, if you encounter, which you may have already, where some dogs are not comfortable with the harness, and so there's some counter conditioning and desensitization techniques that can be implemented for the fosters to get them more accustomed and used to having the harness being put on them specifically and taken off.
Yeah, luckily, all of the fosters that we have right now are very understanding. So if the animals don't feel comfortable, we have had a couple of fosters that have gone that are, like have some handling sensitivity, and they will introduce them on before clipping. That way, slow introduction. So we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great.
Hi, my name is Brittany, and so I did want to touch base on Hendrix a little bit about like his harness biting. We do have quite a few dogs that have like come in and out recently, and it's really hard. Like some of them, specifically, we had a dog named Bruno, where the harness was so high value that there was actually nothing that we could trade him to get the harness back. Like, we would enter his run and immediately, not harness, immediately he would be grabbing the slip lead like out of our hand, and there would be like no treats or anything that we could trade him that was better, like more interesting for him. Besides like a rope toy, he would like trade it for that occasionally, or a different leash. So like, with working with like the place, with a placing marker, would we just be entering his kennel first to work on just learning the place without even having the leash in our hands?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so you would start there. You're spot on. And the other piece you can add to it that we had to do with multiple jumpy mouthy kids, like get super excited, when they see that harness, is take it even so you can do what you just suggested. So proofing that place, practicing that place without the harness or leash in sight or on you is definitely spot on. The second piece, when you want to start building up to getting that back in there, is this may or may not be happening, but one dog that I just worked with comes to mind that just simply us reaching for the harness would put him into that jumpy state, jumping all over the run, so excited, and so we had to desensitize him to that process in and of itself. So what we would do is work towards calm behaviors in the kennel, whether it was 4 on the floor, sit at the gate, or place, because he knew all of those over time, and reach for the harness. If he doesn't, and if he remains calm, then toss him a treat. Reach, toss him a treat. Only if he's remaining calm. As soon as he is not calm, then you want to take your attention away. So reach for the harness, he starts jumping everywhere, walk away. Come back, repeat. Over time, and it might take some time, just again, because we can't predict an animal's learning capabilities, but over time, he'll learn when you reach and he does this behavior, he's not going to get to move forward with that super exciting thing. And you can work on implementing the place simultaneously with you reaching. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
is there anything you could offer for, so like once the leash or the harness is on, the leash grabbers, the ones that like try to walk themselves or try to chew through the leash?
Yep. Yeah. So I like to use the magical peanut butter spoon for those kiddos. So again, having a long spoon baited with some kind of really high value treat that can be smeared on there. It could even be some wet food like I talked about. But for leash chewers as well, you can explore the cable leashes and the chain leashes.
Yeah,
So,
we've used those prior. The chain leashes have done well. I think that there's just been kind of like a concern of like the public seeing like a dog walking with a chain leash.
Yeah, so I would, you can work towards transitioning off of that and giving them a different expectation. Oh, the other thing that's key here. So if they're chewing on the leash, that means that they're self-reinforcing and likely enjoying that and redirecting their excitement or frustration, whatever underlying feeling they might be having, onto that leash. So we have a lot of dogs like that walk with, we always have a wubba with us.
Yeah.
And that's worked out really well. I'm seeing in the chat, just real quick, that someone's having trouble hearing us.
Laura Lynn, it could be on your end because I hear everyone fine, so it could be some bandwidth concerns on your internet. If it's choppy, usually that's sometimes what happens. GTM does pull a lot of bandwidth from your internet in order to facilitate these calls. And again, this is being recorded.
Okay, thanks. Maybe it's my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you're a little choppy.
All right, thanks.
Commenting back, so I'm going to say it's on your end. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah, the wubbas, or find out what toys are reinforcing for them. We have one dog that is just the only thing that works for her on her exciting outings is a specific Kong squeaker ball. So explore with different toys for those leash biters, leash climbers, and see if you can find something else that they would rather have their mouths on.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we were we've utilized like rope toys before.
Yeah, definitely. It's great.
Okay.
Yeah, so just keep playing with it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, some dogs might like the rope toy, but they might prefer that squeaker ball instead. You just got to keep playing and see what's most reinforcing for them. But you're on the right track for sure. Good job.
Thank you.
I have a question. For like door dashers that are really extreme to the point where if you try and sneak out, they'll start biting at your heels, kind of like not deterred by any treats, what's a good way to start like having them not freak out once you go towards the door?
Yeah, so I would work on teaching them place and building that duration of place. So having them hold their place on their bed or wherever you designate as their place in their kennel, and building that duration over time. So you can be in their kennel, have them hold place, and you're reinforcing them for holding place with whatever is highest value for them. And you're slowly over time practicing that duration paired with you approaching the gate to leave. So it's a build up in time with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You all, it's really interesting because I in the past 6 months I've been tasked with a new behavior program that I'm experimenting with here at the sanctuary, and it's interesting to me, but validating as well, that a lot of the questions you all are asking me, I immediately think of a dog in our current behavior program that demonstrates those behaviors, and it's interesting to be able to speak to that, because what we're trying to do is solve some of these common challenging problems nationwide, and it's unfortunate that we know we have so many dogs with behavior challenges across the country, but it's at the same time, like I said, a little a little validating for me to know that I think that we're working with the right kind of like subpopulation of dogs to really figure out how we can help dogs and our staff and volunteers nationwide.
I just have one thing. This is Jay from Best Friends. I think a great thing, the presentation was amazing, but for the team at Norfolk, I think another great thing to take away that Dr. Carley talked about was the volunteers. You know, you always heard her volunteers and staff. And as we build upon in your behavior mentorship that you're going to be doing with the team that's going to be assisting, I think we, myself and the team who are working on our volunteer and foster mentorship, we're going to continue to run, you know, hand in hand, building those resources, not only for the staff, but those plans for the animals, and also getting volunteers to help and assist you guys. Because again, you never can have enough staff members. And as we build appropriate training and safety and resources, not only for volunteers and fosters, we can continue to just build that army around the team to continue to save more animals' lives.
Yeah, I love that, and it's so exciting, and it's fun to bring volunteers into the training aspect. You know, the behavior change piece. They help us so much, but it's been also interesting in our new behavior programming, bringing in local volunteers for us to have specific project dogs and work through very specific training plans, and the success that they're achieving and how excited they are, and they're sharing it on Facebook, and it's empowering other volunteers to want to get involved. So thanks for reiterating that.
All right, guys, looks like we're just a minute past the end of everything. So Michelle Dawson, if you and your team have any more questions, you guys can just email me those and I'll pass them along to Jess and Dr. Carley, and we'll get some answers to that. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today, and especially Seth, thank you for setting this up and recording.
Yeah.
And Dr. Carley, thank you so much for doing this for the team.
Of course, it was my pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.